I wouldn't say it like that, but he is right here rubbing against me. Happy episode 132. I'm going to go love Bullet up and go get some ice cream, I think. So, see you guys in a little bit. Okay, guys, back again. I may sound a little weird today because I'm a little sleepy, but just tired from work. But so our next guest I met, of course. I mean, I don't know why I keep repeating, but Podmatch, I've met so many great guests, and I was reading her story, and I liked what she had to offer and to say, and talking to her off mic. She seemed like a sweet person, and positivity is always a good thing to have. And I always say the podcast has been a big staple in my life to help, for positivity and make me feel better about not only what I'm going through, but just what's going on in this crazy world we live in. And I have an affinity for especially for parents and who help take care of children and especially with disabilities and stuff, and they go out of their way. And so I wanted to have our next guest on. So you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Tim, for letting me be on your show. My name is Lorraine Lewis, and I'm a mother of 7 children. I had 5 children and then adopted 2 more. And, of course, as all parents do, we have quite a few stories to tell, but I just wrote a book that just came out on Amazon called Behind Iron Bars, which is a true story based on an intellectually disabled man who is now in prison, who is my son. And that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. So where do we, obviously we'll get to now and in the middle part of, with your son and all that, but where do we start with the beginning of your story as far as, I don't know, I guess we could, how were you just as a child, I guess? Did you have a decent childhood? I did. I guess a lot of people have horror stories or they have the picture perfect life growing up. I grew up with my sister. We were latchkey kids. We'd walk to school and we'd walk home and use a key to go in. And my life pretty much was surrounded by what was on television. That formed my ideas of what the real world was on the outside. And it wasn't much later until I moved out and started having a life of my own that I realized that, wow, relationships aren't really like that on TV or situations, and people aren't really that honest out there. And I had no clue. So I grew up with a mother who loved me. My parents were divorced. My father was in a profession. How do I explain that one? He did things for a living that probably most kids didn't grow up with. He was part of an Italian family and was a very, very handsome, gorgeous man. But his values and morals were totally the opposite of what I knew to be the truth and reality when I was growing up. My mother was beautiful. She was kind of like that Doris Day, Mary Tyler Moore combo. Okay.
And she just had a heart of gold. I knew she loved me unconditionally. So I had a loving mother who I grew up with her. My father grew up in another part of California. And I saw him maybe once, twice a year. And I had one sister that I grew up with. And then I had a brother I didn't know about until I got into my 30s. And my brother actually was adopted by a very famous actor in Hollywood and was raised in that household in a totally different lifestyle and grew up with people like Clint Eastwood and just all kinds of Paul Newman going in and out of his home. So
Wow.
I didn't know about him until I was in my 30s, and I got to know him before he passed away.
Because the adoption worked out.
My mother, back in those days, she had been dating a guy for about 10 years, and she got pregnant after 10 years. And he
said, if you have the baby, I'm out of here. And back in those days, I guess it was very difficult to have a child and be a single woman and then raise him by yourself. So she thought the best thing for the child would be to give him up for adoption.
Yeah.
So she did.
I just meant it worked out because, the life he got to live. I mean, it doesn't mean he had a great family, but I mean, he got to live a good life for the most part. And you hear a lot of horror stories with,
Yes. Yeah. He was quite a dear man. He was amazing. He passed away, gosh, I don't even know how many years it's been, maybe 8 years ago now, 8 to 10 years. He took his life. And so, you can grow up with lots of money, fame and fortune and be very unhappy. So you just never know in life. But for the most part, my life was typical normal. My mother was a single parent raising my sister and I. And, I pretty much had to learn things on the street or at school. So, it wasn't horrible and it wasn't the greatest.
Right. Yeah.
Just typical normal, I think.
I think that's kind of the middle ground for everyone. I mean, the two extremes is, like you said, it's either horrible, you have horror stories. I have some, but not necessarily with my mother and father. I mean, my dad and I have had up and down relationship, but I didn't go through any kind of abuse or things like that. When I talk about being molested or anything like that, that all happened like when I was in school and things like that. So I had some bad things happen to me, but it wasn't at home. But then you got the extreme where somebody's just everything's perfect and great, or at least seems perfect, and what we deem to be perfect or good. And then there's like the rest of us that are kind of just in the middle ground. There's some good, there's some bad, and you take whatever you can, and it kind of just molds you in life, and you just go with it.
Yeah, I was probably that middle ground person.
Yeah. Now, you said you had 7 kids, obviously 2 adopted, but was that something, a lot of times, especially girls, they really kind of know what they want more so than boys. Was it something you always wanted, just to have a lot of kids?
No, quite the opposite. Okay. I think I had a lot of children to try and get a life that I thought could be obtained that I didn't have growing up. It had nothing to do with, I want this many kids. It had absolutely nothing to do with that.
Okay.
I did not have any great parenting. I had a lot of love for my mother, but there was no parenting structure. Did you do your homework? Are you doing this? There was nothing. And I think that I had no desire, like I'm going to have this many kids. I'm going to marry the man of my dreams. I think I was just searching for a relationship of love. I think there was a lack of feeling that love from a father, from others around me, as I was growing up. And so I think that I was trying to fill that. Yeah,
that happens a lot, especially with young girls that are trying to like replace that major father figure in their life. And especially, even if they come back in their life at some point, there's a period of time where they're just searching for some sort of male figure that replaces them. And a lot of times, especially when you're young, you go about it the wrong way because you're looking for guys. And a lot of times you're trying to even find guys that are similar to your father, whether it's stature, look, whatever. Not that you're attracted to your father, but you're looking for something that's just
exactly
like, oh, daddy's here. And there's a lot of bad relationships coming. That's why they say, when guys are just like, when they wanted to get laid, it's like, I'm looking for a girl with daddy issues. It's like, it's like the known, stereotype.
Exactly.
Which, it's unfortunate because there's too many broken homes, and a lot of times it is the father. Usually when it's the mother, it's kind of alcohol, drugs problem. Whereas the father, it's a lot of times it's just didn't want to be around, or there was other things. And again, there's also the drug and the alcohol and the other stuff. But and so it leaves girls on these like journeys, and that's what ends up happening. And I think it affects boys even more so because of, we are men and we need that father figure to teach us what it's like to actually even treat a woman a certain way, and to just live a decent, just to be a decent man, where your mom can teach you only so many things, but sometimes moms make it up by babying you and treating you a certain way, and then you become more emotional and weaker. And not that there's anything wrong with emotion or crying or anything, but you tend to overdo it in a certain way where you don't have that toughness where you need to have it. And that's why it's really a good balance to have that mother, father, at least figures in your life. They don't actually have to be your parents. So it's...
Yeah, that is so true. That is so true. You need both sides. And when you don't get it, that imbalance shows up somewhere in your life.
Yeah.
So,
and you again, like you were doing, like you were trying to find it one way or another, even if you didn't think you were. It's just some sort of psychological thing you're on, some path of trying to find it. And sometimes you do a lot of destructive things in your path to figure that out. And that's when, a lot of times you fall on your face, and that's when you really figure out, like, oof, like what have I been doing?
Yeah.
When you have to soul search and dig deep and go, oh, wow, this really has
yeah,
been.
No, and that's true. That's true. I could have fallen into drugs. I could have fallen into alcohol. My father was a major alcoholic for a long portion of my life till he got quite probably into his 70s or 80s before he wasn't so much that. He'd have a drink every now and then, but he drank to oblivion when I was growing up. And I think it scared me enough where I didn't want to get involved with drugs or alcohol. I was afraid, I'd go crazy like he was in my mind. So I always stayed on the right side of the road, but the area that I really fell hard was in relationships.
Sure.
I went through relationship after relationship. So, that was my downfall. Everybody has their weak area. That was mine because I was trying desperately to find a relationship that would fill me up, and it just always turned out to be the same way. I would give and give and give and give. And, I became that horribly codependent person. And I think that's why I had 5 children and then adopted 2 more. And I haven't been in a relationship in, 5 years now. So I'm working more on myself and doing things with my children, but, everybody has their thing. So I think that was mine.
Yeah, and I think one of the good things about having a father in your life, and again, me and my dad are like friends, and it's unfortunately not what it could be or should have been, but life is what it is. But one of the things I would imagine for a girl to have that father figure is that because guys know what guys are like, and sometimes we worry too much because we compare them to the stupid things we did in our lives and so on, but it's good to know what to prepare yourself for. Girls can prepare yourself from the other outlook of it. It's like, okay, yeah, guys can be pigs and this and that, but guys can actually tell you what a guy is thinking in these moments and really prepare you for those type of things. And so when you're kind of only having the female perspective, you're going into these relationships, and if you're just looking for love, like love can mean so many things.
Exactly.
And a lot of times, there's people that fall in love and that's why marriage is such a kind of ridiculous thing to do anymore, because, less than 50% of people stay together because and the ones that do stick together or do get married, they get married for kids, they get married for whatever.
Right.
Sometimes they're a drug dealer. Like sometimes it's the dumbest of things. And, that's the, when you go into it, even, like I said, I'm 33 and I'm still kind of figuring exactly what I want. And then you have the needs, you want certain things, and then you're just like, well, sometimes you just deal with and you cope with, or you sacrifice. You go, you know what? Like, let's say like, oh, all I want is sex. Well, like my idea is I don't want just sex from somebody, but right now I can't have a relationship. So it's like, I guess there's that.
Exactly.
Like, so you just start making those decisions based on, because loneliness is a problem. Like loneliness is one of the biggest problems with depression. Like you get so lonely and you get so bored, and you start thinking whether it's horrible thoughts about yourself or other people, and you start thinking about like, how can I, like you start making dumb decisions by like, well, let's say texting exes that you shouldn't be texting because they don't love you or they never cared about you, or you get on dating sites and you just start making dumb decisions just because you're lonely. And you and I,
that is so true.
Yeah, you're a little older than me, and you grew up in a different generation. Again, how old are you? I should ask, just because so I don't presume.
No, that's very true. I went through that phase for many, many years. the loneliness was very difficult. But then something changed at a certain point, and I want to say probably about 10 years ago.
Okay.
And I started learning, and I honestly don't know what it was that triggered me, but I started being able to be okay and at peace by myself. But I had to do the things that made me happy. And I wasn't able to do a lot of things that made me happy because I was in a consuming job. I mean, it took over everything, hours, everything. And it was for the almighty dollar at that time.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it was, I changed how I viewed things, and I started somehow, and I don't know how, I started valuing myself. And I was like, no, this person does this and that. No, I'm not even going to entertain that. And whereas before, in my head, I tried to figure a way. There would be a way to work this out and make it work. And it was always based on me trying to fix it or make it better, or I could be better. And it was a very, codependent view. And I wasn't codependent because I had gone through that 30 years ago and worked on that. But probably in the last 10 years, I made a decision. It's like, you know what? I'm going to do those things I love to do. I love to do CrossFit. I love to do things with my kids. I love my home. I love sitting out on the back patio. I like helping people, and I'd start filling, huge amounts of time, filling myself up with that. So I'd get satisfaction out of it. And one of the biggest ones was competing in CrossFit. I get so much satisfaction out of that it was okay if I wasn't in a relationship. And so now I'm to the point where, if I meet somebody one day, great. If I don't, I'm okay. I'm happy. Whereas before it was like, that's all I could think about. I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be the holidays alone. I don't want to be sitting here by myself. And now I don't think that way anymore. And so I don't know what flipped the switch, but something did. And I'm so glad it did, because I remember those feelings of loneliness. Sure. Many, many, many years of loneliness. And,
well, it helps that you built this, you have these kids all around you. You have a group, you have people who love you and to do stuff with. And
mm-hmm.
I mean, I know it's not the same, but you have kids to go on adventures, and you're distracted because kids do take up a lot of your time. You have to worry about feeding them, especially when they're babies. I mean, they could roll over and smother themselves. So you have to literally be, aware at all times, and you have to constantly look after them. And your time is so focused, and the amount that you had, it's not like you just had one. So, I mean, 5 and then 2 adopted, it's like that's a lot of your time that, even though I'm sure there was still time spent towards that, but you still also have to shower. You still have to pay your bills. You still have to do all these things. So a lot of your time is consumed of thinking about other stuff that has nothing to do a lot of times with you, other than stuff that's, I guess, came from you. But a lot of it doesn't have much to do with, your love life. So it's
exactly. And I think, I got to a point where everything was a secret. Don't let anybody know that you're weak in this area. Don't let anybody know that you made a mistake. I was in this I have to be perfect mode. I was too afraid to let anybody see that I was this human being with, many, many, what's the word? Words on the tip of my tongue. Okay. With these, just that I'm human and that I make mistakes and I'm like everybody else. But before, I wouldn't allow myself to do that because I didn't want anybody to think I wasn't good enough, or I was not great, or I was weak, or I wouldn't allow. And I think I got that from my father, who was just that. In his mind,
man, the bravado, the strength. You can't really show weakness. And
hugely. My father, when he'd introduce me to all his friends at the bar when I'd go visit him, the intro was always the same. And a lot of people would say, "Oh my God, you grew up with that? That's abuse." And it wasn't for me. Now, it lowered my self-esteem. Yes, I'll admit that. But he used to introduce me as, "Oh, this is my daughter, Lorraine. She's a little douchebag of a girl, a little flat-chested. The doctor slapped her mother when she was born." He thought it was funny. He thought it was endearing. He had a different idea of what that same intro was every single time he introduced me to somebody. And, everybody would smile, ha, 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 yeah, Pete. But I didn't learn till, of course, many, many years later that probably was not the best things that he could have instilled into my mind
growing up, because it lays a foundation of insecurities, especially with a girl.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you can
Guys do
take it
that all
two
the
ways.
time, like the busting balls and stuff. And I'm sure he's
Yeah.
probably was powerful enough or had stuff in his life where he was, and not many people would question him and tell him like, hey, shut up, like you're being an asshole.
Oh, no,
Especially
never.
from the female
No.
side where it's like.
He was known as he would break your legs and your arms. That was not an option. Yeah, you never told him anything. But, I knew the good side of him. Right. I knew the really great side of him. So.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm assuming when you're around other people, there's still an image that he has to keep up. He's not embarrassed to say you're his daughter, but he's not going to do the cutesy pootsy. Oh, you're my little baby girl. Like he has to
never
treat you like one of the guys.
Absolutely, he would wear white silk shirts where you could see through them, where it would have a pocket in the front, and then he'd take a big wad of $100 bills, fold them in half, and stick them in the pocket of that shirt. Yeah. And he always drove a Rolls Royce, a different one every year. It was how he looked, it was the image, and he was an extremely tall and very handsome man, very handsome. And so there was this huge image. And for most of my life, I believe that was the way it had to be. You had to look like something and be a certain way and don't let anybody see any weakness. Otherwise, you were nothing. So I had to.
I feel like he was a character in The Sopranos.
Yes, very good.
I mean, it's an amazing show, but I know a lot of Italians hate it because it's stereotypical, whatever. But it really is based on a lot of true things that happen, and the reason why it hit so many Italians is because they know that side of that lifestyle, and it's very similar in that Tony Soprano. Yes. In the show in general, there's a lot of other characters.
They had families. And that was me. That was my family. That was. My father thinks he kept it away from us, but not entirely.
Yeah, I think that's what made that show so good. Beyond just the amazing acting, the realism of it is just they show you everything. The fact that he is a good dad, but he's also a shitty dad. He's also a good husband, but he cheats, and he's also a piece of shit sometimes. But he's a great provider. But everything he does is also in blood money, but but he also goes to the store and buys sandwiches. Like he's not just some guy, like and that's why
he's still a human being.
Yeah, I'm not Italian, but it was my favorite show ever because of how real it is and because of obviously the acting. But there's things that go on in that show where it's like they're talking about where they parked at, and it's like, and I'm fascinated because it's so well done and it feels so real. And again, I know, like I said, that's why. I mean, I knew you didn't want to talk too much about your dad, but I knew it just there's characters in that show that I'm like, it just kind of reminds me of him, minus like the Rose Royce, because in that show they kind of covered up how they at that point in time they were really concealing of what they drove and stuff because of law enforcement and all that. But,
and when you grow up and I didn't know any of that until I was in my 20s. Until I was married for the first time. I got married in Las Vegas, and all of a sudden my dad shows up there in Las Vegas. And I'm like, how did you get here? And he said, the Goombas, they had a helicopter. They flew me in. I'm like, they put you on a helicopter? Yeah, here, come on, Rainey. And I'm like, that's when I started to learn. That's when I realized I didn't have a clue growing up at all. And then things started making sense.
Can I ask how old you are?
I'm 63.
Okay, because I was trying to figure out like an age difference. So you're 30 years older than me, and so because I was even thinking about like internet and all that, and obviously at that point in time, the internet wasn't around in your 20s. So.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So you have newspapers and all that, but you don't really have a whole lot of what's going on. I mean, the mob is a thing. There's a lot of stuff going on, but it's not people. Back then, people didn't really. There's rumors and stuff, but not many people like to talk about that stuff because it could come back.
Well, we wouldn't dare. Yeah. I would not dare talk about it because I can talk about it now. My father is gone. My mother's gone, but I would not have the balls to talk about it when they were alive. And the fear would be that something was said or got banned. I would never be willing to take that chance. Sure. I knew how powerful my father was, and there was no way I'd ever cross that, ever.
Yeah.
So
even if you probably could get away with it because of being his daughter, you probably were in fear of him because of his swagger, his energy, and like the connections. There's a lot of that stuff
Yeah.
back then. Even though the weird part is that when people talk about like gangsters and all that then and now, at least then there was like a respecting. There's a lot more to it than what it is, because today it's just kids just going off shooting each other, and it's really sad.
Yeah.
So mostly
Yeah.
back then it's just adults or kids in the family, but they're like in their 20s and they're just in the family. It is what it is. But it's still a thing. Like it's still bad, and I mean. But I mean, when people talk about, let's say, like John Gotti was one of the most respected people ever, and he kept a very safe neighborhood. It's just you crossed him, you were probably going to disappear. So there's two sides of the sword, but it ends up it is what it is, I guess. But
that's very, very true.
So when you started having kids, were you, now I have to ask, were you searching for guys in that kind of lifestyle, or did it just happen, or
no.
did you just find was it just some random construction?
No, I think the truth of the matter is anybody who paid attention to me, seemed like they did care about me, love me, then that's the direction I went. I was married for the first time at 19 and had my first baby at 20. Was divorced by 22. And and then the story goes on. But I had 5 children. Instead of just going in and out of relationships, I was a person, the good old fashioned, you get married. And that was just a terrible way to go. But I had nobody to help me, teach me, show me, talk to, about those things. It wasn't, when I grew up, nobody, my mother didn't say, let's sit down, we need to have the sex talk. Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about relationships. That wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
That was never a thing. And my father was never, hey, how's your life going? How's school? What's your grades? There was nothing. Zero. We pretty much raised ourselves, and you learned as you went. And one of the things that can be very challenging is learning the difference between a good relationship and a bad relationship, or a safe relationship and not so safe. I learned as I went, but I got married. Who does that?
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. I know those like talks are really important. They're awkward. It's like, the birds and the bees, which I never understood why birds and bees, but regardless, they start telling you that stuff, and you don't, and so, because if you don't hear that from them, you hear it from your friends, and your friends are always talking about how cool it is and this and that, or how scary it is. And so you have your own little feelings of what it's about and what you should try or shouldn't try. And, you'll have that one friend. It's like, you should have a baby. It's great. It's like, your heroin, it felt good. It's like you start getting these theories, and it's like some stuff sounds really cool to you depending on who the point of view is coming from. And you're just like, and you just kind of, you're on like autopilot, and you're just kind of picking up things as you go along, and you're like, okay, this is, so sex is this, and
exactly,
and dating is this, and you're not really, again, doesn't mean, because when your parents are strictly like, no, don't do this, obviously you're probably going to try it, but there is a way of balancing it. You're just saying, hey, like, you prepare yourself for these things. These are things that this is going to happen to you at some point in your life.
Yeah.
Prepare yourself. But when you go based on people your age are immature, and their lack of life experiences is so small that they're just going on what their adrenaline rush, essentially. Like, they're going on the last couple years of, again, especially when you're really young, it's like you're a teenager, so you're just experiencing a little of what life can be. Unless you're a child that went through a lot of trauma and stuff. But in general, like, when you're a teenager, you're just kind of figuring what life is kind of about, and you're not even really going to know until college and you start working and all that. So you have ways to go to really figure it out. So when you're passing information around to your other friends and you're the experienced one, it can get bad for some of those kids that get mixed up in the middle there, because you don't know what is all true and not.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no conversations. There's no questions. I did whatever I wanted to do. And it wasn't in a bad way. It wasn't because my mother didn't care about me. She trusted me. That was the problem. And I didn't do anything that was really wrong, but I was in really different relationships, in and out of them, because I couldn't maneuver my way. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't understand. I tried to learn. It was just very challenging. And now I am such a different human being now. I wish I knew what I know now back then. Sex back then was it was nothing. It was absolutely, a guy thing, in my opinion. I didn't have a clue. And now I have a totally different idea of what sex is. And, same thing with a relationship, same thing with conversation, not having it be a one-way street.
Yeah. I think
to be able to listen.
That's what happens to a lot of young girls. They go on these trips. They don't even care that the guy they're with doesn't care about ever pleasuring them in bed. They feel like this is the way they show love back. And it's part of the lost part of it, where you're just like, I'm having sex. I mean, it's okay, but it's for him. But it's like, no, not really. Again, that's, even though we're in this kind of, to some degree, we're kind of overly sexualized in this society, because some of the music, some of the stuff that comes out for the young girls is really not good, and for young kids in general. So there's some of that, but there's also some of it where women are owning their own bodies and their sexuality and saying it's okay to be this way and all that. So there's the yin and the yang, there's the positives and the negatives. But yeah, I mean, I know back then the further you go back, the less people really talked about it. Even if they were, promiscuous and they're very sexual, a lot of people. Sorry, guys, we had a malfunction. But yeah, back when, girls were very, because I've talked to my mom, and, she's I think 1 year younger than you, and my grandma's 90, and, the older you go back, it doesn't mean that sex wasn't around and people didn't party and do things. Of course, it was just more, again, kind of like with your father's lifestyle, it was more hush-hush. Again, you had the radio and then eventually newspaper. So you didn't have, even when television was back then, like television was a couple channels. So the further, now everything is just so out there. So the information, it's so different. So the woman, sex was out there, but again, there's not all these different sites and these things that tell you what is bad and what is good and how to treat your woman and, and all that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah,
that is so true.
So you're taking from your own personal experiences, which in your case, a lot of them weren't great, and your friends who are telling you what is good and bad. So,
Yeah, exactly. No, but it wasn't, I wasn't being beat, and I wasn't being sexually molested, and I wasn't, it has its ups and downs when I was growing up, but so far as who I am today, I just decided to be what I want to be and not let somebody else define that for me. And I think I spent most of my life letting other people define who I was.
That's awesome.
And trying to live up to that.
Now, your one child, I know he has special needs and all that. Is he one of the ones you adopted? Is he one of your ones?
No, with regards to my book that I wrote, Matthew, we call him Maddie. He's one of my kids that I had.
Okay.
And he's intellectually disabled. And one of the things I talk in my book about that is he has mental retardation. He's mentally retarded.
Right.
He's not, he doesn't have mental illness. And I know it was a big problem when I was writing this book. I had several people, I wanted to call it Behind Iron Bars, mentally retarded and in prison. And they became extremely pissed off at the fact that I would be politically incorrect and say that. And I said, well, he's my child, and I have no disrespect with my child. I love him to death. I've given my life for him in many different situations. But the truth of the matter is, mental illness, say somebody has schizophrenia, they have borderline personality disorder, they have with some different illnesses. Illnesses can possibly be treated with medication, or at least tone it down or calm it. And sometimes therapy can help it. Whereas if you have, exactly. However, if you have mental retardation, the definition of that is brain damage.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't, no amount of pills on the planet or therapy is going to change that brain damage. It isn't going to control it, change it, make it better. You're not all of a sudden going to start becoming a smart person when you have mental retardation. When you go to a doctor and specialist and they do all the tests on your child to find out, what does he have? And they come back, they don't say, oh, well, your son is intellectually challenged. The medical diagnosis is he has mental retardation, meaning it's brain damage. It's not something that they can fix. You don't all of a sudden get healed and made whole. Yeah. And I think I took the higher road and labeled the subtitle on the book Intellectually Disabled and Imprisoned, just so I wouldn't turn people away from the book. But I do go in and define it. He's not going to get healed and made whole or better or sustain himself on a pill or therapy, so that was a huge fact that I wanted to really talk about and let people know. I'm not downing or cutting or, using a term, how dare I, he has the medical term is he has mental retardation.
Yeah.
Which is brain damage. So
when I was reading that on your profile, I respected that because we do live in this, and I bitch about it all the time, this politically correctness nonsense. It's so silly.
Yeah.
And again, I know you grew up in a different time where there was no such thing as that. People just said what they said. And
exactly.
So and again, I think there is a middle ground. There's some stuff that does need to change. And look, there's some really stupid shit that goes on in this world that needs to change. I think there's a lot. I mean, look, slavery was something that needed to stop. Obviously, gay marriage is something that should I'm glad it's happening. But
exactly.
there's stuff that needs to change for sure. And in stuff in speech and stuff, there's some things that really are just ignorant and all that. But when you start to try to change the terms of someone's actual medical condition, it gets a little hairy because you're like, what are you doing? Like, because it is mentally retardation. And then people will just like, they're retarded. And it's like, look, it may sound bad, but that's the it's like we try to sugarcoat everything now, and it's not that. Like,
exactly.
Like they made that movie about the Tuskegee Airmen, and they kind of took out all the really racist stuff. They took out, like with Tom Sawyer, they took out, there's a character in the book named Nigger Jim, and it's not because the word is great and because we want to highlight the way, they're highlighting the way that time was and how people were treated that way.
The context, yes. How was the context? What was the time frame? What was the truth of what was said? Why wouldn't we say the truth of what was said?
Because people are afraid of the truth. That's the thing. And that's why when people say like, oh, well, how are we, what about the kids? Well, like, as I've said so many times, what we're teaching the kids nowadays, and I don't have any kids, but we're teaching the kids just to lie and be untruthful.
Exactly.
Because everyone just doesn't want to say how they really feel. So it just comes out in this bullshit. And then people 10 years later get called out on, get called up on Instagram or some social media for something they said in their household or whatever, because they were holding back how they truly felt about something. And deep down it was there the whole time. But the reality is like, we're all a little screwed up. We all have some good in us. We all have some bad in us. It's just hopefully the good outweighs the bad. But it's like we all try to pretend like we're so friggin' perfect. And it's like, no, man.
Exactly.
Like we're human. That's the thing. We're a broken species. It's just we try to pretend like we're not. And so I respected when you put that there because it's look, the word like even the word retard, like it's the one word, like I when you're busting balls with your friends, kind of like what your dad is doing, like when and it's times I've said to my guy friends like stop being retarded, and
Exactly.
It is the one word that I've kind of tried to take out, only because it's a group of people that can't defend themselves. Whereas like when you're busting balls, even if you're saying like, hey, stop being a faggot, it has nothing to do with gay people at all. You're just kind of saying stop being an idiot. But it's like at least gay people can defend themselves. I can have a logical conversation with gay people and say, look, if you don't like it, I'm sorry, blah, 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 whatever. But I can't have that with someone who has mentally retardation, and it's not fair to just keep throwing the word around. And honestly, when I heard it from other people and not knowing their context, you go, you stop being retarded. Like it starts to sound a little weird. And then being a disability advocate, it's like, it's probably something I probably shouldn't say because, and I'm just being honest, but I'm also honest about the fact that I'm not shy. Yeah, of course I've said it because I'm not perfect and I don't claim to be. And so I did.
Well, a lot of it is that context. If you're name calling, you're saying, you're retarded, you're a retard, or you're a homo. When you're name calling, that's a certain context. But if you're talking about mental retardation, he's mentally retarded. That is his diagnosis. There's a different context. And I think that's where this country has really gotten screwed up. It's like, did he really, he called him a retard. Was it the truth? Yes, he did. Are we going to say, well, he called him intellectually challenged? How dare him? It's the context. And I think that we're just so way out in the left field on that. So I thought, okay, with my book, I'm going to put intellectually disabled. But, a lot of people say, oh, well, you know what? My brother has mental illness. My son doesn't have mental illness. But they confuse it with what that term means.
Well, mental illness is now thrown around with everything now. And some people, and again,
exactly.
Look, I think we all have some form of it. And I have it. So I'm not even going to sit here and I talk about mental illness all the time. But you're right.
Yes, we do.
But you're right. Mental illness is it's a scapegoat now. People, because they use it when it's not really always applied. It needs to be applied. And so it's just there. And it's like, oh, you got mental illness. It's like, no, man, there is a difference between, like what your son has and that, someone who's schizophrenic or someone who's depressed or suicidal or
exactly.
There really is a difference. But we just, even like when I talk about people with disabilities all the time, there's a lot of people that people don't want to throw in there with disabilities. It's like, well, what about people with dwarfism? It's like, they're just little people. It's like, no, they have bone structure problems. There's a lot of issues with them. They're disabled.
There's a lot of physical issues. Yes, 100%.
Yeah. And that's the same thing with, when people say, like I tell people I'm legally blind, they hone on the blind part and not the legally part because I can see some. And then they're like, well, what does that mean? And it's like, well, you don't look blind. It's like, well, because I'm not blind. I didn't tell you I was blind. And because there's so many interpretations anymore, and there's so much information. Because that's another problem with the internet is that as great as it is for information, now there's so much information. Like for me, I'm dealing with brain fog, and I'm trying to balance my depression and all these things. Well, go ahead and look up supplements for depression or brain fog or anything. You'll get 1,000 different things, and you'll get 1,000 different studies and charts that'll tell you which supplement is better. And this one will tell you the complete opposite of the last one you read. So you can just, I don't even know how you figure it out anymore. You just got to go with gut and your doctors and you come up with some sort of plan. But
yes. Yeah. And you have to, there isn't a book that says if you have a mentally retarded child, this is what you do. And this is how it works out. I didn't even have parents to talk to me about sex or relationships or anything. Yeah. And I'm supposed to figure out how to raise a son who's going to be intellectually disabled his whole life and along with a array of other disorders.
Sure. Which number of, like, you have 5 kids you have, what number does he come in?
He is number 4.
Okay, so you had experience with children, but I'm sure you weren't prepared for this. This is totally different.
Well, when you read the book, it tells you, I didn't even know he was mentally retarded. I've got to tell you this until he was tested. God, what was he? He was in, what happened was there was actually in, was he, I think, a freshman in high school. He was always in a special needs class. The doctors always told me that he was slow, but he would catch up. He's just a lagger boy, right? Sure. So I believe that. He was slow, but he'd catch up. And so I never, I never coddled him, babied him. I was as tough on him as I was with the rest of my kids. But there was an incident that happened when he was in school. So here we are, we hit high school, and I think he was a freshman in high school, if I remember correctly. And he was being bullied out on the field. So at lunchtime, the special needs kids in the class, had an IEP always and was in this class, and he'd go out to the field at lunchtime and he'd watch the other kids who'd play soccer or whatnot. Well, apparently, there was one boy and other kids, I guess, that followed him that would bully Maddie every day on the field. And he didn't know what to do about it. It became unbearable. So in his mind, he thought, okay, when I go home, he decided after I don't know how many months it had been going on, he was going to get his sister's pocket fishing knife. And I don't know if you know what a pocket fishing knife, but it's about 2 inches long. It's teeny tiny, and it folds into like a 1 inch. Yeah. I can't remember if it was 1 inch or 2 inches, but it's teeny tiny little. It was a fishing pocket knife. It's to cut line. Right. He was going to take that to school. Now, this is his thinking. And if that boy starts bullying him again with his friends, he's going to take that out and scare him, and he's never going to bother him again. Now, that was his way of, protecting himself. He didn't know what else to do.
Makes sense.
Well, this was when we lived in California. In California, there is a zero tolerance policy for any weapons of any kind. And so Maddie, the kid, comes up, starts bullying him. He pulls that out. The kid runs and gets the teacher. They call the police, and they haul him off in handcuffs to jail. So I go pick him up. I get the paperwork. We go to court. The judge threw it out of court. He's intellectually disabled. It was just one of those situations. But I was called in by the school psychologist. I think it was school psychologist, psychiatrist. I always get them confused. And she said, can I ask you what your doctors have told you about Maddie? And I said, yeah, they said he's a little bit slow, but he'll catch up one day. And she said, she pulls out a blank piece of paper and she draws a line down the middle of the paper. And she said, this line that I've just drawn represents average, or what we call normal intelligence, IQ. She says, if I go just a line above it, that's higher intelligence or a higher IQ. But if I draw a line underneath this line, that description is mild mental retardation or below intelligence. And I believe your son is there or a little bit below. And I could have fallen out of my chair when she told me that. It was the first I've heard of it. Anybody said anything to me? She goes, I'd like to send you and Maddie to an institute that will run tests, and they'll last all day. And they'll tell us, where your son lies. And it'll be free, no charge.
Before you go on, what was his functionality? Because I think a lot of people have this misconception of everybody who's mentally retarded. They just make noises, they bob back and forth. But what was he?
No.
His verbal cues, how, was he relatively, all there?
He physically, to look at him, looked as normal as anybody else. Okay. He's tall, thin, blonde hair, looked like anybody else, blue eyes, right? Okay. And then you knew something was off when you'd go to talk to him, because he has extreme difficulties in certain areas. No, he doesn't babble. He doesn't drool. He's not in a wheelchair. He wasn't low functioning mental retardation. He was a higher functioning. He could never graduate and get a high school diploma. They allowed him to go to school till he was 22, and he just couldn't do it. I think his math was 5th or 6th grade level in there, was as high as he could get. Reading, he was able to get 9th or 10th grade level. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to complex situations, relationships, something that involved 2 or more steps, he becomes confused, stressed, disoriented. So he went to this facility, and after all the tests came back, this is what those doctors all concluded. They said that he had something called adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety, with depressed moods, attention deficit with hyperactivity disorder, which is ADHD, combined type, mild mental retardation. He also had part of that, they thought, was from a brain injury due to lack of oxygen at birth, because he had the umbilical cord wrapped around him. He had encephalitis when he was young, which is something you can die of, which is in the brain. Immune deficiencies, Barrett's esophagus disease. And then they labeled him with psychosocial stressors, difficulty in establishing and maintaining any kind of friendship. Because of what's involved with that, you have to be able to maneuver when you talk to people and understand them. And he doesn't have that ability to do that. And then the last thing they said was he has an impairment in reality testing with communication, a major impairment in several areas such as work, school, family relationships, judgment, thinking, or mood. These were his diagnosis at whatever age that was. I think he was 18 or so, around in there, 17 or 18 when he had those. And that was from all day with many different tests and many different doctors. And he had many of those tests years later. But the fact that here and during those days, there wasn't anything or anybody that says, oh, he can be a part of this. You need to have him be a part of this. Or there's somewhere you can go. I had no clue. I raised him like I did the rest of my kids. And they said probably the best thing I ever did for him was to not know that he had mental retardation until much later, because he got to go as far as he could. And I didn't baby him or coddle him and kind of hold him back from being the best potential he could be.
I was going to ask you, like, when you actually got all those diagnoses and everything, like, that probably made you feel horrible. Like, just as obviously you love him, but also, like, I'm sure there was a small party that was just like, I wish I didn't know all this, because it changed everything.
The part that made me feel horrible was the fact that I think in my head, maybe things would have been different for him if I had known sooner. But every single pediatrician and general doctor that I took him to, oh, he's a little slow, he'll get better. And that was never going to happen. And it never did happen. And then you're dealing with a grown man who physically has the same needs and desires and ailments and issues as any other grown man. Yeah. But the mind isn't where the body is at and is never going to be there. And it's like, you don't think about those things. It's just not a part of, I'm working a full-time job. I'm a single parent and I have these kids I'm raising, and you're just in survivor mode. Okay, is your homework done? Are you doing this? So-and-so has a baseball game. You're just going from moment to moment. And now you find this information out after Maddie's basically grown. But they flat out told me, he can never live on his own. Mm. He can never drive a vehicle. You start learning this afterwards, after years of people telling you, oh, he's slow, but he's going to catch up. I can't tell you how many times people told me that, but I think they based a lot of that on his physical capacity and that he could speak. He's a very nice guy. He's a very kind person. Yeah. But he can't, his judgment is not there. It's, I remember one of the questions that was asked to him, and this really opened people's eyes. And the question was, so Matthew, if you have a son and he's having an argument with his mother, and they're having a bad argument and they're screaming and yelling, they're in the kitchen, and the son says, you shouldn't have said that. You should have never said that. You need to stop telling me what to do. You should never say that. And the son goes, and he goes in his bedroom and he gets a gun and he comes into the kitchen and he tells his mother, you need to stop telling me what to do. And the mother says, you need to stop telling me, this is my home. And the son turns around and he shoots the mother. Okay. So what do you think about that, Matthew? And Matthew's response is, the mother should have listened to the son. Look at what he did. And so his understanding is that, oh, this would have never happened if he should have listened to his son. He can't judge. He cannot pull things apart. He cannot figure things out when they're critical, life-threatening.
He might not be able to take the whole. He might have, like, half of the story might be gone now. He might just only have the second half. So he's just gone with, well, they're arguing, and she should have just listened. Yeah, that makes sense. Exactly.
And it was so shocking to me. I was like, wow, okay. And so that's pretty much the story of Matt so far as his growing up, and then finding out his diagnosis not until 18 years later. Now what? Now what do you do? We tried many, many jobs for him to try and get from about 18 to 22, many different jobs. And it was painful. It just wasn't working. And so he went on Social Security disability, and trying to figure things out for him was not easy. And then that brings us to, at a certain point, we have the SWAT team showing up at my house one day.
Before you go to that, because there's a question I wanted to ask you. Was there any bit of you, because, in the beginning we talked about just, who you were and all the mistakes you made and all. Again, you're a kid, so lack of guidance with parents and and all that. Was there a part of you that felt like everything that happened to him might have been your fault? Because, and I'm not saying it is, but like mothers, that's a mother thing to do. And, let's say maybe bad choices with men. I mean, you can run the gamut of all the stupid thoughts that go down your head of why his situation is your fault, even if it's not. But yeah, did you ever have that thought, like, okay, like his situation is my fault?
Not when he was growing up, but definitely when the situations arose why I wrote my book. Right. That I felt as a parent that I should have figured something out. I should have found a way. I should have known. Definite guilt to this day, very hard for me to talk about without a lump in my throat. Right. There should have been a way. Before that, him growing up, I did not feel like I did anything wrong. I was working. I held him accountable like all the other kids. He played soccer as a kid like any other kid, but he couldn't even do that because of the way his mind was. They just didn't want him on the team because he had troubles with that. Coordination and, different things like that, even though he looked like everybody else. But no, not growing up. I understood, I realized, he was who he was, not out of any fault of mine, but the things that happened later, I felt that I should have been able to find a different.
I mean, I feel both of your pain, because I've been more where your son has been, but I've seen what my mom had to go through with me, and a lot of where I can see myself in his shoes is obviously the disability part, but mainly the constant people telling you, like giving you no hope. Like their answers for you are no answers. It's just like, well, he can get this and he can do that. Like, I was told I was going to die when I was a kid, when I was, because I nearly did die. I was told I was already had lost my sight. I was going to be told a lot of things and that I would never be all there and right. And because I know you don't know a lot about me, but a lot of all my skin burned off, my hair fell. It was to a really horrible reaction. And it's what caused my sight problem as well. But I didn't go to special school. I actually ended up being an all AB student in high school. But I did go to a school that was all mostly visually impaired. It was half and half, but I was so smart, or too smart at least for the visually impaired classes, because in a lot of ways they were special classes, because depending on the teacher. I had one teacher that was really good and she was really advanced and she taught us and she read and got us into really more advanced math and stuff. But when I went to fourth grade to fifth grade, my fifth grade class was teaching fourth grade work. It was just the same old stuff. So I was so ahead of it because I had already learned it last year. And so then they put me into what they call a non-VI class, a non-visually impaired class. I was lost because I wasn't learning this stuff and I was so behind and I felt really stupid. And then I had some teachers and some people who really cared about me that pushed me to go to this really good high school, which I didn't have the grades for. So there was a long time of me trying to find a place where I even fit in, and of course working and a lot of stuff. Now I'm just very hard-headed and stupid that I'm not going to take anyone's shit, and I'm just going to do my thing, and I'm going to work because I do work and I have my own place. But I it took a long time to me to ever get here. And there's a lot of, even like now, I have one more shot at getting an eye surgery. I'm going to Cincinnati, Ohio in about a month.
Oh, wow.
And it's my last shot at a cornea transplant. It's the guy who invented it. It's the only one. They're giving me a 10% chance I'll even do anything. But it's how many, like, good news for me when I go to the eye doctor is no news at all, because my eyes don't get better. There's a lot of things with me just don't get better. So it's the whole fitting in and just trying to preserve some goodness in your life. You're so used to hearing bad news. And again, I'm more mentally there than your son is, so I can bear a lot of, that's where the mental health comes from. Whereas I can bear a lot of what he can't, and I can understand and realize what's going on. And to some degree, I wish I didn't, because it is really, it's harsh and it hits you really hard. But yeah, I feel a lot of his story because I get, like, when even as a mother, you're trying to find a place for where he'll just fit in and you know, he can work and he can do this, and you want to prove everybody wrong, but everyone around you is just saying, there is none.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, there's some, and
Yeah.
there is something, but there's not enough people that guiding you in the right direction, and it sucks, because this is like what you said off mic earlier about, you know, this stuff isn't talked about, and if it was talked about more, your son would have probably had a more fruitful life, because we could do something about it. But go ahead. I know you were getting to the whole SWAT and coming to your house.
I was wondering if it would be possible for us to continue this another time.
I'm not going to your door from the SWAT.
Well, actually, I was on my way to work in my vehicle, and at that time I was married, so was my ex-husband. And I got a call from my friend who lived across the street, and she says, you need to get back home right away. And nobody knew what was going on, and I showed up, and the street was completely blocked off. They had a SWAT, what do you call that? Like a mobile home. It's a huge, giant, whatever you call that, SWAT team trailer. And then they had just dozens and dozens. It was the FBI, the SWAT team, the police department. And I literally, because nobody would tell anybody what was going on, I literally thought somebody died, that something happened at my house. And they just made everybody wait outside. And, you know, I let them know that my children are aside, you know, what's going on. They said, well, your mom. I said, yeah. And they said, everybody's fine. Just hang on tight. And finally, they pulled me into their trailer. And they had said that, do I know of anybody in the house that would be looking at child pornography? And I said, what? I mean, I was just in shock. I couldn't believe it. I said, no, I don't know anybody that would be looking at child pornography. And they said, okay, well, we've got a hit, you know, on an IP computer at your home that child pornography went into that IP address. And so I had no clue what they were talking about. And then one of the people, because they were searching the house and everything, they came back. They said they found the computer, and then they called me back in and they said, is your son Matthew? And I said, yes. And they said, well, we found this on your son's computer, and he was actually set up in a sting operation in a chat room where people normally, when they go to this chat room, it's like a pornography site, like a regular adult pornography site. And then they try to entrap people into going and looking at child pornography. And I'm like, what? I was just in complete shock. And so he said, now, we didn't find it on your son's computer. It looks like it was just deleted. So I asked them if I could go talk to my son, and they said yes. So I went, I said, Matt, you know, do you know anything about this? And he says, well, I was in a chat room, and, you know, there's a lot of people talking and saying different things. And there was one text on there kept saying, you've got to go look at this. You have got to go look at this. You're not going to believe it. You have to go look. You're going to miss out if you don't go look at it. So being the obsessive compulsive person that he is, he had to go see what everybody was talking about. And he said when he went to go look at it, he couldn't look at it unless he downloaded it. So he pushed the button to download, and the minute in the state of Arizona that you download something, it's over for you. And so he went and looked at it, and he thought, what is this? And he said he just deleted it because it was children, very small children, pornography. And he just thought that was very strange. And so he didn't think anything of it. And this had happened, I want to say, 5 or 6 months prior to them coming to the house. They had set all this up. And so then they came back out and they said, you know, can you tell us a little bit about your son? So I tried to explain to them that my son is intellectually challenged, blah, blah, blah. Does he drive? No, he can't drive. And so they searched everything, and they came back, and they said, it's very strange because in his room, we found the whole episodes of Harry Potter books. And then he's got his Special Olympics medals that he won at the Special Olympics. He goes, we didn't find anything, no pornography, no nothing. And I'm like, yeah, it sounds like he was in a situation that he doesn't know how to maneuver himself around or understand. And so, I talked to my son, I asked him how it happened. And then he had told me that, I was in this chat room and they said, you got to look at this. And he goes, I guess I shouldn't have looked at it. And I said, yeah, I go, Matt, did you know that if you look at child pornography, it's illegal? That's not a thing. And he goes, I didn't know that. I didn't know anything. And so anyway, that's how it happened.
Which is weird, but I mean, for the average person, like, to listening, like, you would immediately assume a person was lying, but obviously with his intellect, he probably is telling the truth. That's the crazy part.
Yeah. Just the whole thing, it's just sad because, people who have a problem, whether it's with pornography, whether it's with child pornography, no matter what the problem is, usually there's other signs of it.
Right.
And, or, they're in contact with human beings, people who like children try to contact children. And there was no contact. It was fully set up. There was no, on the phone conversations, there was no, let's meet you. There was none of that. It was maneuvering in a chat room, which he does not have the skill or ability on many different levels to understand what's going on. Now, maybe somebody else would. And then maybe some sick people who are so, sick with whatever their problem is, can't see past that and want to see whatever it is that people are talking about. But anyway, it was quite disturbing. They took him off to jail. I was extremely worried for him because of who he is. And so I called down to the jail and I explained to the person I was talking to, I said, can you please check on him? I'm concerned for his safety. And so they said, yes, I'll call you back. So I got a call about 45 minutes later, and the lady said that she went and asked him if he knew where he was. And he said, I think I'm in prison. I'm in prison, right? And she said, no, this is jail. And he just didn't really grasp the gravity of the situation, I don't believe. And so I was able to bail him out the next day, I believe. I don't remember how quickly I was able to do it, but I was able to bail him out. And I think I went through, 10 or 15, what do you call them? Where you try to have somebody where you do bail. I forget what you call those people that do that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But they're, they wanted all the money up front, and I didn't have them. I was a single parent basically at that time, even though I was still married, and we just didn't have the money. So I found this one place, and it was just somebody watching out for me. And they said they would take payments. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was the only one. But I explained the situation to them. And so they did it. And I took care of my end and made those payments. And I was able to get Maddie out. And then my problem was because my daughter lived with me with my grandchildren. They would have had to either go find somewhere else to live, or Maddie had to go find somewhere else to live because of the situation. He couldn't be around children at that time, in their opinion. And so, and then at that time, Isabel and Isaiah were both under 18 still, even though they were in high school. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Well, my ex had just moved out and had a rental home, a 4-bedroom rental home, and nobody was in it with him. So he's like, here, just let him come stay with me. Not a problem. And so that was just meant to be also. So he's able to go to his address and stay there. And then every day I'd get off of work and I would come home, make dinner, feed the kids, and then I'd drive over to my ex's house and feed Maddie dinner and either play a game or talk with him for a while. And then I did that for months and months and months. This went on. And it had to go through the court system. Well, in the state of Arizona, the laws are extremely high. You basically have to be drooling and in a wheelchair for them to consider you incompetent. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do. I really was concerned about getting a public defender. I had heard a lot of things about not just having a public defender, but to get somebody with a specialty that can handle that. And so I started looking around. I was telling my friend across the street, I said, Jody, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have the money for this. I'm making payments, on $10,000 right now that I don't have. And the next day she called me over to her house and she said, I'm going to give you $50,000 to get an attorney. And I said, what? She goes, I want to give you $50,000 to get an attorney because this isn't right. And I won't be able to continue on with my life if you don't let me help you. And so I thought about it and I thought, I guess I don't really have many options. And I felt like that was a huge gift. And I found an attorney out of California who specializes in defendants that are intellectually challenged and situations like this. And he said, I don't have a license for Arizona. I have a license for California, but I could get one, and I would require that you have to pay for when I come out and stay at a hotel out there and whatever else. So instead of $50,000, it ended up being $60,000 or $65,000 by the end of this trial and everything that went on. But he agreed to take the case. He felt it was unjust, and we had to go to 3 different doctors for Maddie. The prosecutor's side has a doctor, and then there's a defense side doctor, and then there's a third doctor, I guess, that will split the difference, I guess. And, they felt that he was, one felt he was very incompetent, and the other one felt that, according to Arizona laws on the prosecutor's side, he's on the borderline there. And then there was another doctor who didn't know what the heck he was talking about. And I just thought those kinds of things only happen in movies that they made up. But this one doctor went in to testify that, I think he's, competent enough to stand trial. And the judge asked him, why do you feel that way? And then my attorney said, why would you think he's competent enough to stand trial? And he says, well, if he can drive a vehicle. And my attorney says, drive a vehicle? Why do you think he drove a vehicle? He says, well, in my report, when I met with him, he said he worked for a pizza place. And I thought he said he drove, delivered pizzas. And so then they had to call me in the courtroom. Has he ever driven? Has he ever owned a license? I said, no, never in his life. And they said, well, he's delivered pizzas is what then I said, he's never delivered pizzas. He cleared tables and swept floors. And, the owner had a physically handicapped son, and they knew Maddie, and they wanted him to work there because they knew he couldn't do a lot of things. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable that these kinds of things are going on. So then they, to split hairs, sent my son to a court-ordered doctor to see if they could make him competent. And I'm like, I never understood. You're going to see if you can teach my son who has mental retardation, brain damage. You're going to see. Now, he went to school for 22 years, could not get a diploma. But now you think you can teach him enough where he's competent now. So I thought that was the
problem at the time, though. They're trying to figure out if he's competent currently. Why are they trying to make him competent now?
To stand trial so they can send him to jail, to prison, because in Arizona, if you download something like that, the sentence is 12 years, minimum, 12 years. And so if you're in another state, it could be handled a totally different way. It depends on what state you live in.
So you don't. It doesn't matter if you're competent at the time of what you got in trouble for?
Exactly. In these situations, competency does determine whether or not if it's an automatic sentence. There is no account for the intellect. Now,
he went and saw this lady for, it was either 3 or 4 months every single week. She taught him, this is the jury, this is the judge, this is the prosecutor, this is the defense. She teaches him all that stuff. By the end of 3 to 4 months, she said, he's incompetent. So they came back, and just before Christmas, they dropped the case. So he got to come home. And before he came home, I went to computer places to see about getting security on the computers. I researched on the internet everywhere I could think of. I called Social Security Disability. I called intellectual. I did my best to try and find avenues to try and find some help for my son. Other places, maybe somewhere he could go during the day. There aren't any here. Somewhere that, he could predict anything. There's nothing.
What do you mean by help? What kind of help did you want him to have?
Well, when you have a grown man at home all day and he doesn't have a job, getting a job was extremely challenging. We tried so many. Nobody wants to hire somebody like him. He's not smart enough to run a cash register. He's not smart enough to deal with people. Can he wash dishes? We tried to get different jobs for him, but they just weren't going to hire him. And so it was challenging trying to find him things to do in the daytime. And so here I am working a full-time job. I've got other kids, and I just had no avenues of entertainment. Somebody to basically babysit, a 30-year-old man. It just was not, the avenues weren't there. You can get young teenagers to babysit, but grown people wanting to babysit a 30-year-old guy, that I have never even seen that. I tried to find things. There were none. And there's this need, and apparently there's a lot of guys out there like Maddie, a lot, that are challenged, that can't live on their own and can't drive. And a lot of them have trouble getting jobs or keeping jobs. And it's like, what do you do with these individuals? They're human beings with, hearts and feelings and thoughts in grown bodies, but they can't make it on their own, and they can't, people don't want to take care of them unless they're massively challenged, like where they corral them and put them in a room or watch TV or,
caregivers and all that. Yeah.
Right. But there's just, there's a huge need, and I've already been approached with regards to two different possibilities of making some changes. One would be in our communities in having a facility where parents or families can take their mildly intellectually disabled, where they can't go out and live on their own, individuals, but yet they're smart enough where, they need they need something to do. A facility where they can go, maybe where parents work, but they can't really afford it. I had a lot of kids. There wasn't a lot of money to keep paying for this, and this. The money ran out at a certain point. And so that was one. And then the other thing that came up was the education systems. Instead of saying your kid's slow and they're going to catch up one day, being able to find those kids that are challenged right away and offering support somehow in direction to parents and to families. Those are the areas. And then the other thing was, in my own neighborhood, there's a guy that does cybersecurity for corporations. And I have a huge desire to reach out to him to see if he can help me come up with something where it can allow, because kids like Maddie, I say kids, she's 37 years old, challenge individuals like Maddie, they love games. They love entertainment, and they can go where they're comfortable with that. But dealing with people is very hard for them. And I wanted to talk to this guy about, can we have computers that don't hook up to an internet, but maybe can hook up to friends other intellectually challenged kids, and where they can play games, and they can, because they want that, but it's too dangerous for them to be searching on the internet. They think they're smart enough, but they're not smart enough. So I am doing my best to find other avenues. Now, my son currently, this happened again, and this is the reason I wrote the book. I had gone and I was told that, like the computer he's on, this should be good to go, can't go onto the internet with it. I did all those things that parents do, but when you don't know much about that stuff, you don't think about it. But I had a smart TV in a guest bedroom that has like a iPad connected to the internet, but for that TV in the guest room.
Right.
Never occurred to me, never thought about it. 5 years after this first incident happened and it was all dropped, he was talking to somebody, I don't know who, and they said something, you got to go check this out on the internet. And he said, I think I have with the smart TV, have the iPad thing, does that go to the internet? And they told him yes. So he went to that and it happened again. It was a different avenue, but it happened, exact same thing happened again.
And I don't
and
even
this time,
as a regular, like a person who's really good on the internet, I really don't even know how you bump into stuff like that. Now, yeah, you could search it, and I know there's the dark web where you can really find it, and it's much easier and all that. But I mean, for a person who's just kind of...
Unless somebody tells you where to go. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I just haven't bumped into anybody in my life that just said, hey, go here. And of course, I wouldn't go. But man, I mean, two times, that's, wow.
In the chat room, they told him exactly where to go. They gave him the link. I mean, they set him up to do that.
Now, where's he getting the chat rooms from, though? Are these like phone services?
Oh, it was pornography chat rooms.
No. I'm saying adult. Like where the people that he's meeting that are pointing him in this direction. Where is he meeting them at?
Oh, the second time, that I don't know. Okay. I never found out very much on the second round because it was during the COVID. The courts were closed, and so I couldn't go. I never once was able to go in the courtroom to find out anything, to do anything. I was not allowed to. Nobody was allowed to go in there, and so everything was coming secondhand to me. I never got anything, never received anything. I couldn't afford, of course, the attorney the second time, so it became a public defender the second time. But the second time they decided that he's competent. If it happened again, then he's competent, and he went away to prison.
Wow.
And I'm like, I don't know how I could have stopped this, unless we take away the phone. You have a little flip phone, so that wasn't connected to the internet. I don't know who he was talking to, but I never got to find out exactly how he knew to go to where he was told to go on there, because his computer was not hooked up to the internet. Yeah. So that's something that's left open that I don't want to ask him on a phone when he calls me from prison.
Right. No, of course not.
But it's a problem because he's just smart enough to go searching and things. He's like a curious kid, but at the same time, he doesn't understand the complexity of what certain situations, what's going to happen. I mean, it's ridiculous what can happen to you.
So now is he going to have to serve the 12 years?
Oh, yeah. He's already been there for 3 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
How's he doing?
And I talked to, I forget what they call them, not the warden who runs the whole place, but they have I think it's case manager or something like that over so many individuals. And one day I had to talk to him because Maddie's on several different medications. And he said, I have other guys, just like 5 or 6 guys, just like Matt in here. He says, and they shouldn't be in here. They shouldn't be here. And this is a man who works in the system. And he said, it's an epidemic. And it's with these guys who they have low functioning abilities to maneuver in conversations, situations, but they want to have a friend. They want to be able to feel like they're normal, like everybody else, and be in a little chat room and all that. So he said, it's just a real problem that there's a lot of guys just like him. He says he has 5 or 6 others that are just like him, and they should not be in there. It serves no purpose. It's not like they're going to be healed and made whole.
How is he doing in there right now? Is he doing okay?
He's doing better now. We were having a problem about 6 months ago. He was assigned to a room with an older man who was just making his life
miserable. He'd call me crying all the time, crying. So I said, I want you to put in for a transfer. And then I got a hold of the case manager, and they finally got it done, and they were able to move him. They were just torturing him, throwing things at him, throwing things on his bed, calling him names, telling him that you can't really be that stupid. Are you really that stupid? Just when you have to live with that all day, every day, it's just bullying in a different,
right.
in a different venue, just torturing him. And finally they moved him to a room with somebody he had met before he had even gone to prison.
Mm-hmm.
And it was somebody that was kind to him. It was a guy that understood him and was kind to him. And so he was very happy when that happened, and he was moved. But there were some challenges. There were some challenges, and nothing can make it better. He's not going to change who he is. It's strange to me that this. You can't. I mean, we could, but it won't work. The attorney, when he found out it happened the second time, he goes, "Why didn't you call me?" I said, "John, I don't have $60,000. I can't even begin. I mean, I killed myself to pay that off the last time." I said, "I don't even have that same job anymore. I got laid off from it." And he goes, "Well," then he wanted to read my book, of course. And so he read my book, and then he called me, and he said, "Wow." He goes, "This upsets me because something's not right with us." He goes, "How can the courts, the doctors, everybody say you're incompetent? And because it happened a second time, no human being was involved, but you're going to throw him away for 12 years because why? Now you found him competent? How could you find him competent?" He goes, he says it smells, was his words. And I said, yeah. So I realized that I need to, there's other moms and dads out there, family members, who are just like me. They're trying to work their hearts and souls out to support their family. And then one of the family members is intellectually challenged, and it doesn't get better. They don't become competent. He's not competent. You ask him today, okay, what are all the different pieces in a courtroom? He wouldn't be able to tell you today. So I don't know how they base their decision or whatever, but it's like, okay. So then the choice is, what do I do now? Do I just wait until the time's up and then he comes out? And, what do I do? What do I do now? So I was like, okay, I'm going to just tell my story, write the book. And it sucks because, I've had some people say, well, what kind of a parent would allow that to happen a second time? What kind of human being would allow, knowing what happened, how could you possibly have allowed that to happen? Why didn't you do something? It's like, what was I supposed to do? I searched. I tried to find any and everything to help me. I didn't find anything.
Yeah.
It could tell me. I found a place in another state where guys just like him, where they lived in a home. But this home loves him and wants him here. But there is no place here that he can go to in the daytime. There is nobody here that wants to come babysit a grown man. There's no activities that somebody like him gets to be involved with. It's an unfair situation. It's like, okay, how can I make this better? How can I make it different for the next family, for the next Maddie? And I'm not sure what the answer is. Nobody's told me. Nobody suggested to me. There can be a lot of judging, and then there's a lot of people who get it, who understand.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't have an intellectually challenged son, or grew up with one, or understand, it's not that he's just mentally retarded. He has obsessive compulsive disorder. And when you have compulsivity disorder, a small child who wants to get into a Christmas package, they're going to find a way, no matter how many times you tell them, don't do that. Because that compulsivity is very strong. And I think with Matt, when he was, looking at pornography, he's in a grown body that reacts like any other grown body. But his mind, he's never been with anybody or had a girlfriend or any of that. And so I think it's easy to manipulate somebody like that. And right or wrong, whatever anybody judges, no matter what, I know that my job is to find ways to
offer solutions, figure something out, see if somebody has an idea, see if I can make a difference somehow, so this doesn't happen to somebody else.
Yeah.
I
mean,
and it happens very easily. Yes.
And
well,
yeah. And they won't
case
see it
manager told
coming
me
either. But like for you, I
yeah,
mean, you didn't see it coming, and even though, I mean,
no,
obviously your
not at
story
all,
out there
not
will
even a
help, but
little.
as much as you're lamenting like what he went through and what he did and all that, like none of these parents are gonna ever see this coming. Whether, and again, it might not even be child porn; it might be something else. But
Exactly.
this is just a setup for them to, and again, obviously depends on your state and all that, but how many people have enough
Exactly.
research and understanding of what someone who is considered mentally retarded, again, like I said earlier,
Exactly.
that's why I asked you about what his functionality was, because a lot of people think
Yep.
someone who's mentally retarded is just a person who bobs back and forth and they moan and they make sounds.
Exactly.
And that's not it, because I think people just think, well, you can talk. Oh, you're not dumb. But that's, again,
Exactly.
that's not what it is. There's so much more. There's so many layers to it that I think people just haven't even tried to peel back and even figure out what else is in there. Because people live on a surface level. They know, the small and the big. They don't know a whole lot. They just go, okay, that's this and that's that. Okay, I know what it is. It's the whole black and white, but there's always a gray area, but no one ever really goes into the gray area. They just go, oh, it's black or it's white. That's it. There's no other thing. And
Exactly.
like, that's not it. Like, there's so much
Exactly.
to it. And with the lack of research and lack of knowledge on
exactly
these specific type of people, this shit is going to happen over and over.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's in there with 5 or 6 other guys just like him. What does that say? It's like, and when you have the case manager who works at the prison day in and day out telling you he doesn't belong here. I have 5 or 6 other guys just like him. They don't belong here. But he goes, I spend a lot of time trying to protect them. Guys from stealing from them, from hurting them, from doing things to them, from manipulating them. That's nice to know that there's somebody who cares enough to give a crap to make sure that they're watching out for them. They can only do so much. Yeah. They can only do so much.
Yeah. I mean, and if it was a movie, you would just think it's like a frame job. Like, it's a weird thing, like, where you just go, okay, like, something doesn't add up, and at the end of the story, it'll all be better, but this is real life.
Right.
And
yes,
it doesn't play out.
Well, if you're in another state and you physically go meet a child, or you're talking to a child on the phone, or you're corresponding with a child, even with, grown men who go meet children in other states, they don't serve 12 years in prison.
Right.
It's not a thing. Arizona and Hawaii, I was told, are the top 2 states that have the stiffest penalties, and there should be stiff penalties for child pornography. Absolutely. But I would think that you would want predators, people who are seeking and searching out or meeting or something to do. But getting lost on the internet where you're setting them up, and then you're not even separating the intellectually disabled with those who are normal intellect. Yeah. It just doesn't seem right.
If you remember, I mean, they had that Dateline show. What was it? To Catch a Predator. And a lot of those guys didn't really go to jail. They just were busted. They were humiliated. Some of them killed themselves. Some of them did get arrested because they were real offenders. But a lot of them were just embarrassed, and they now were, on that app where there's a dot on their house. Now people know of their activity. But a lot of them didn't really end up going to jail. So, you know, and what he did was very mundane. He's, again, it's not right either way, but he didn't know better. So it's, and
he knew it was not okay after the first incident. He was told this is not a thing. But when you are in his mind and you're dying to see what somebody wants you to see, you want to go see it. When you have compulsivity, it's very hard to stop your impulses when somebody's telling you, you've got to check this out. You've got to look at this. No matter what, throwing him in jail doesn't solve anything.
Right.
It really doesn't solve a thing. I try to think of one thing it could solve. Like he's going to learn his lesson. He knows what happened is wrong, that he's not supposed to do that. But would it keep him from not getting wrapped up in a situation like that again if it came across? And then I'm like, okay, he comes home.
Do all the computers go out of the house? We just have TV and that's it. I can never be on a computer. I live my whole life working from a computer out of my office in my home.
Yeah.
You start going, okay, what do I have to do to protect him? Because he can't protect himself. So then it's like, okay, what do I do? How do I do this? There's got to be other people out there just like me and just like my son. And I would like to be able to have some solutions where those individuals with this disability can have fun and live a life and not be threatened with entrapment. In the state of Arizona, they call it a sting because then it's legal. If it's entrapment is illegal.
Yeah.
To me, it's the same thing.
Oh, sure.
In other states, it's illegal. In Arizona, it's legal. But, my first job was to write the book. I said, I'm going to write this book, make people aware, and, put myself out there, let people, call me whatever they want to call me. But then I ask everybody, what's your solution? Tell me what changes I can make in my society, my community, in the laws. How can I make it different?
Yeah.
What options can I offer my
defeated
son?
And just to give up because they don't have answers because they don't know anything. So they're just like, well, this is the law. This is what it is. But it's like, when do we make progress? When do we actually learn? Like you get to 2022, it's like somebody will say something insensitive, whatever. It's like, look, it's 2022. Are we still anti-gay or are we still anti something else? Like,
Exactly.
can we we have progressed in certain areas. Can we really think about what, like, some stuff is so obvious. I've said, because I'm visually impaired, I've said sometimes the people that are blind in this world are the people that have perfect vision. Because some of the stuff that they see is so obvious, it's right in front of them. It's like with voting or anything. They do it just based on biases and stuff that's right there, and they won't grasp it. They refuse to take in the knowledge that will give them a real point of view. Instead, they blindly just take whatever it is they feel is comfortable or whatever their take is. And it's so frustrating because it's like, this isn't right. It doesn't sound right. And the only way you're ever going to feel it's wrong is if it happens to you or someone you care about. Then it's your problem. But now, since it's someone else's problem, even like with the lawyer, it's like your lawyer that you had, it's like, well, another 60 grand, maybe I could have done something. But it's like, really, man, like it's not right. Like, why does 60 grand make a difference? I get it. Everybody's got to make money and all that. But
the truth is I didn't contact him when it happened the second time because I just knew I couldn't afford to do it. So he didn't even know it happened the second time. Sure.
But even the first time, it's like, again, because any smart person can see that from afar, and you do enough. And again, it's his job to know and to do the research. He's got to, take your case on. He's got to look into it. And then it's like, oh, okay, sure, this is 60 grand worth. Why not? And again, I get it. We live in the world where we need money, and money runs everything, and it's sad. But it's like there's some point where you just go like, man, like, does anyone have a heart in this world? Because it's clearly this is like ridiculous. And again, you're doing it because you're his mother. It's very obvious, but there's so many people like trying to sabotage somebody who's, again, mentally incompetent. And look, again, no one's condoning any of the gross shit that people do in this world with children and animals and all that. It's horrible. But at the end of the day, like, I'd rather catch somebody doing child porn and they didn't do the ultimate sin of actually touching someone, and let's try to rehabilitate them. But we write people off as animals before we even ever give them a fair chance. And it's sad. And again, with him, this isn't even something he would ever delve into. But another thing I was thinking, like, imagine how many things people told him to go see that had nothing to do, any like illegal activity. It was just, hey, go watch this video of these girls dancing. Like, how many times that happened? It's just you don't have that documented because who cares? Yeah, it's not pertinent to what's going on. But with this, like, I mean, it's very easy to catch people, and the thing is, there's millions of, I don't know about millions, but there's thousands of people getting away with it. There's kids being child trafficked all the time, and it just keeps happening. And it's like, and then they come to some guy who just has a mental issue and unfortunately screwed up. But then there's people getting away with it all the time, just doing horrible shit. And you hear about even the celebrity stuff, like R. Kelly, where he's just having a cult full of women.
Exactly.
And it's like, but it's R. Kelly. He's a talented. Yeah, he is talented. But that doesn't give him I mean, the Cosby thing. I mean, I live in the state that just let Cosby get off. So it's one thing. Harvey Weinstein, and again, we're just going with the famous people. But it keeps happening. And it's like, well, it's because they're that. It's like, that's the thing. If you were a person of some power and notoriety, you knew people, you probably could get them a job, and you probably could get them out of jail. You probably could do these things, but you don't have the money. You don't have the way of, you just don't know anybody you just don't have the resources. If you had the resources,
exactly,
sure, his life probably could have been better, but there's nothing you can do from a person who's making minimum wage money. You can't do anything. There's nothing
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you could catch some breaks and you can meet some good people, like your friend who gave you money. I mean, there's stuff like that. There's some breaks, but man, there's a lot of, even like with me, just trying to do this podcast. Like, I'm trying to get it where I get advertisers and certain things. It's hard because I don't know anybody. I'm meeting people through the show, and I'm meeting a lot of amazing people, and it has progressed, and the listenership and subscribers and stuff go up. But I mean, and it started from 10 people listening to a few hundred and stuff now, but it's constantly grinding. But like, if I remember one time when I saw like Michelle Obama, when they got out of the White House, she got a podcast and she had like 2 million followers immediately. And it's like, and again, it's not even a jealousy thing. It's just like, it's about who you know. And she's not talking about anything special. She's not changing the world. She's just talking, and whatever. It is what it is. There's plenty of podcasts just talking about nonsense. But it's like when you're a person that wants to help and you care so much, sometimes you stress out and you put so much effort into just trying to make some difference, like what you're doing. And you spend so much time and I'm glad you've been able to like really something like this with the book. Like, that's awesome, because there are people going to read it, and it definitely will give them a different outlook on whether they were completely like a staunch supporter of let's put him in jail type of, like, those type of people.
Oh yeah.
Or, just would open the minds of parents who have kids like yours, and it's just like, shit, I need to make sure I watch everything and make sure I'm aware so this doesn't happen to my kid.
Yeah, you just don't think it can happen. You just don't, you're so busy working, or you're so busy taking care of other kids, and you're so busy. You don't see it coming. I never saw it coming. It was shocking to me. Now, of course, the first time it happened, I had to know that it could happen again. Well, how am I supposed to make that not happen again? I took the precautions on the computer. He had talked to people and playing games. Was I supposed to screen all the people he talked to, shut it down? Still trying to treat him like a human being in one sense, but yet maybe I should have become a dictator and said, no, everything's out of your life and it's going to be like this, and I'm shutting everything down. And, I'm hoping that somehow I can help other families who have a challenged family member like Maddie, but I can't do that until I come up with solutions. I've got the problem here very clear, but I have to have solutions, and that is what I'm working on. I'd love for there to be a facility that parents can drop their intellectually challenged kids off during the day while they're at work, where there's fun things to do. Yeah. Ping pong, maybe computers that are only hooked up to each other and you can only play the other person on the other side of the computer. Doesn't go to the internet, doesn't go anywhere. And they have people to play with.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem with these kids. They have no friends. Nobody wants to be friends with them. Nobody. Sad. Your family members do. They care. But
I was even thinking like video games, but like even like old school video systems. But the problem is you can't play anybody but the people in your household. And if you play with people online where you have the internet, but let's just say, because some of these you can't really like let's say a couple generations ago, the internet, you couldn't really do much like web searching and stuff, but you still talk to people, and there's still a lot of people that can encourage you to do certain things and all that. So you're kind of, and there's a lot of people on there just saying all kind of racist, all kind of horrible stuff on there. So you don't really want that either. And like I said, you can go back to the old generation consoles, but the problem with that is you don't have anyone to play with. So
Exactly.
it's really unfortunate because if there was a place for them to go, then you could have maybe those old type consoles or computers and stuff where you can have just the games and stuff, and they
Absolutely.
could or board games and all kind of things like that. But
They could watch movies. They could play games. They could interact with other kids, talk to human beings instead of being locked away all day in their room, which is what most of these kids do.
and
I
have a
haven't met
life.
any. Exactly. Exactly. And most families have to work.
Yeah.
Most families have to work. Kids like that, they have special needs. And, I call him a kid. He's 30 something years old. They're still kids.
Yeah.
They still don't understand. So anyway, that's my goal. If somebody wants to judge me for that, I'm all for it. Go right ahead. But,
Silly.
if you're going to judge me, at least offer me a solution, an idea, a thought. I'll take anything. Let's try to fix it instead of condemn.
Can you promote the book one more time? The title?
Yes, it's called Behind Iron Bars,
Yeah.
Intellectually Disabled and in Prison.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you in the very beginning what the title meant, but now it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's funny because that's why I like to just talk to the person and learn, and I looked up some of the stuff you were going to talk about, but I didn't see it all coming. That's the thing, because when you said like, oh, he got out of it, it was like, oh, okay, but I could have sworn he was in jail, but then it came again. Oh, it's like, oh, Jesus. So,
Yes.
yeah, I mean,
It actually came 5 years later.
Oh man, wow.
5 years, and it was on the entrapment. It was on a sting setup.
Yeah.
Same thing.
It blows. What are you gonna do?
But it is what it is.
Yeah. Oh, I really appreciate you for telling your story. I enjoyed it. It's really
thank
fun.
you. I appreciate you having me on your show. I very much value that, and you're very kind. I appreciate what you do for those who are disabled. It's very important, and not enough people want to work or support towards that.
Yeah, because I mean, look, even your son is a rare case, but also look, it's hard for me to get a job, mental capability or not. My vision to a lot of people is a liability. They don't want to take me on because God forbid I hurt myself or hurt someone else or blah, 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 blah. All these things, yet they'll continue to hire people that will constantly get fired or quit a couple weeks later when they find a job, or they'll screw up. They won't have the loyalty that a lot of people with disabilities do have. And it's just, it frustrates me because I know, it's like 75% of us, 73% of us are unemployed, and it's very unfortunate. And people do, if 73% or 75% of any community, a black community, Asian community, anybody, there would be riots in the street if all of a sudden they couldn't work, that people just denied them, and they shouldn't. And it's like, it's okay for us. And I know the disabled community is a very unique community because there's so many different types of people, and there's so many ways to accommodate each individual person. But man, again, like you said earlier, we're human, and I just don't understand. Like we're getting very far away from, men are so much better than women. We're getting so far away from, black people are monkeys and animals, and we're getting away from, gay people are inhuman and ungodly and all these. We're getting so far away from that stuff, but we're still so far away from like what disabled people are. It's like, we're just people. We have an issue, and our issue for a lot of us are very visible. Some isn't visible, like with the chronic pain where it's, internal and people can't tell, but like we go through shit all the time. And, we're the people that are like, I say it so many times, that we're the people that are perceived to be the broken people because of something on us is broken. But yet we're always the ones that are trying to help people. And it says a lot, and that's why I do what I do, but I also why I talk to so many people, whether it's parents like you or actual people with disabilities, because it helps me to feel good about who I am, because, it's easy to feel very secluded in my own little bubble and that I don't belong. And that's why, like your son's story, though I have had a little more privilege and more advantages than him, I've felt very similar to him in a lot of ways. And I could, on one hand, find a few places in my life where I could tell you I felt like normal or felt like I belonged. And I don't, I live a life of for the most part, normalcy, and I do my own thing. But, how many people told me along the way that I wouldn't be shit. I wouldn't make anything of myself. And, and again, like if the eye problem was my only problem, my life would be great, but society doesn't make it great. My mental health doesn't make it great. Like, and the mental health stuff comes from all the other things that happened to me. And it's just, again, I can talk about my disability like it's nothing and be proud to have a disability. It's just, it's everything else that makes life so hard. So, and like I said,
people don't want to be bothered.
No,
they just don't want to take the time. They don't want to be bothered. They're in a hurry. They're busy. They don't want to take the time that it takes to figure out a solution.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with what you're talking about, what goes on in your life. It's the same thing with Maddie. And, and I don't know any solutions, but, I'll give you an example. With Maddie in prison about 6 months ago, he wanted to work. He wanted a job. And so they hired him to mop the hallways. And he doesn't do well with a broom or a mop. It's very challenging for him to do the coordination of it. He was fired. I think he had the job maybe 2 or 3 weeks. They fired him because he just wasn't good and he couldn't do it good enough. It hurt him so deeply. Here he thought he was doing a good job and it hurt him. He was so hurt by that. And I said, Matt, you go get another job. Just get another one. That one's just not meant for you. There's one that you're going to be really good at. You wait and see. And another job came up scrubbing pots and pans all day long. Yeah. Pots and pans all day long. And he did a good job with that. The coordination with that worked for him. But sweeping and mopping is very challenging for him. So he did so well with that job. And somebody bothered to be okay with taking the time with teaching him that 4 months later, they gave him a raise with that job. And then they said, can we teach you how to do food handling? Now they knew he couldn't take a written test. So they worked with him for 4 or 5 months. And then to take the test for food handling, they asked him the questions and they helped him. That's how you resolve people who have disabilities. You take the time. You find another way to make them productive. Nobody ever in his growing up was willing to do that. And I can't tell you how many jobs we tried out for him to work at. But there's always another way, just like with your site. There's always another way. If you can't get this over here that you want this way, then you go another way. And that's where I feel my job is right now, is to help those with disabilities, whatever kinds those are. We'll find another solution. So that one didn't work. Okay. There's got to be somebody somewhere who has an idea, somebody who had a thought. And, one person at a time, we'll figure it out and make it better.
Yeah, that's why
not such an issue.
That's why it takes so many people all at once. I think everybody's trying to do it in their own way individually, and it's like, no.
Yeah.
I mean, my big thing is kind of bringing the disability community together in my own way, because the reality is the disability community is all over the place because there's so many variants of us, and a lot of us just, one of the things I didn't want to fall into, which I did in the beginning, is just what a lot of others were doing with their podcasts or YouTube channels, where they were covering their own disability and they weren't delving deeper and they weren't, respecting the entire community. They weren't going and saying, hey, what about those people with autism? What about dwarfism?
Yeah.
What about, whatever, MS and all these different things. It was just, what is your problem? Okay, let's talk about this for 30 episodes. And it's like, no, man,
right.
It's not going to help anybody. I mean, it will help, but you're going to run out of topics and you're not going to be able to reach more. And that's the thing. I think so many of us we're mushed all into this one category of this guy in a wheelchair logo. And
yes,
at some point,
that is the problem.
Yeah, but at some point we have to fight back and go, okay, this is how you see us. Let's show you what unity and strength is, and then we can show you how different we are once we're together. We're so again, there's a lot of shame and humility in the disability community because a lot of us don't want to even acknowledge that we're even disabled. So
yeah, because it implies that you're less than. Everybody has their challenge. So if you want to call it a disability, if you want to, whatever you want to call it, we all have our challenges, whatever that challenge is. But it's not less than. And I think that's the problem with people who don't have these disabilities. It's like, I don't want to have time for that because I don't want to be around less than. And it's like, no. As a matter of fact, I have my youngest child who I adopted, the last two. He has Asperger's autism. And I've been humbled with Maddie and then with my son Isaiah, who has Asperger's. That can be very challenging. And then I've had other kids with I have a transgendered child, and everybody has and I'm not saying transgender is a disability, but there's things that the transgender they go through, and then it can be crippling for them. But yes, and people just don't want to deal with it, and they don't want to take the time or just be bothered with trying to find a solution. They're in the fast lane.
I actually I want to wrap up the episode. We can finish up off mic,
sure,
because this episode is going to be really long. So, can you promote? No, you're good. I enjoyed the conversation. Can you just promote your book one more time, and then we can just end the episode?
Yes, it's called Behind Iron Bars by Lorraine Lewis, and it's about an intellectually disabled man who's in prison, and it's based on the true story of my son.
Well, thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.